Hey y'all, welcome to the Coyote Trapping School podcast. I am your host, Chris Pope. I hope it's that time of year. This is the 4th of November, so for a lot of you, trapping season is probably kicked off now or is fixing to kick off very soon. So, best of luck to you, and hope the season goes well. I'm going to touch on kind of a major issue that we're all facing this season, or potentially facing this season. I've heard a lot of discussion and thoughts around it, but before I get into that, I wanted to make sure everybody knows, particularly if you are a new trapper and you're trying to figure out how to get started, what to do, and you want to accelerate your learning and just stop looking through the hours and hours of YouTube videos trying to find the different bits and pieces to put it all together to be able to get started setting traps for coyotes or raccoons or beavers or whatever it is. Be sure to go to coyotetrappingschool.com/trappers academy. That is a resource that I have put together that's got informational step-by-step videos that walks you through everything you need to know to get started trapping from start to finish. Coyotes, beavers, raccoon will be added shortly, otters, working on covering all fur bearers. We'll have monthly question and answer calls, and try to make it an area where if you're wanting to take that leap and go ahead and get started trapping, it's kind of a one-stop shop where you can go there and kind of have a trapper in your pocket all the time and get you started. So coyotetrappingschool.com/trappers academy. If you use the code podcast, you'll get 20% off membership, and so go check that out. I think you'll be excited, or I think it'll really help. I'm excited about it. From a beginner trapper standpoint, I think it's going to shave significant time off of you actually catching stuff, getting in the process of setting your traps and catching things. So now on to the order of business. So there's been a lot of talk and discussion and questions and rumors around NAFA, North American Fur Auctions. They've had some leadership changes over the last year, and things have kind of been trickling out over the last, I guess, month really. And I'm not as plugged in as others are, and so I've gotten different questions and things, and I haven't really had a good answer for people. But as it sits now, NAFA just put out a press release November 4th. I just got an email a couple hours ago about it, about North American Fur Auctions entering creditor protection, CCAA, which is when you dig into it, it says in their letter, it's basically the equivalent of filing Chapter 11 bankruptcy in the United States. It's pretty close to it, and it talks about how it was a difficult decision, but they've struggled. So the issue apparently got started a couple months ago when NAFA issued checks for fur that it sold, and between the time that those checks were issued and I guess a lot of them got cashed, the bank that NAFA was working with I guess canceled their line of credit, and so a small percentage of the checks bounced, and of course that sent shockwaves throughout the trapping industry. And NAFA has tried to find other creditors to cover, other banks to work with to cover that, and has been unsuccessful. So there was some announcement, I guess maybe 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago, about NAFA and Saga, and I should have looked Saga Furs. What Saga stands for, honestly, or if it stands for anything. But they are an auction house in Denmark, I want to say, in Finland. And apparently that fell through, but in according with the press release, so it seems like NAFA is still wanting to work through and not just cancel all the debts, but try to repay the debts that they owe, and so they are working to sell their ranch meat portfolio to Saga Furs, and so that will leave the wild fur. And in a line here it says, thereafter we intend to organize the proper and appropriate disposition or return of all furs held by NAFA, and to consider future options within the context of the CCAA proceedings. So, I don't know how that's going to work so far. I mean, I've got fur still there, right? And that, I would think it would be a lot more feasible financially for them to work out a deal with some of their purchasers to sell that fur versus ship it all back to everybody. At this point, I don't think anybody wants their fur back. I shouldn't say that, because I don't rely on my fur check. So I just assume them sell it and still get a check. Of course, there's the concern of, are they going to sell it for dirt cheap just to move it, just to get rid of it? And who knows? Presumably, they're still going to want their commissions off of those sales so that they can try to cover other debts. So who knows how it's going to work out? But at this point, it appears that North American Fur Auctions is no longer existent for all practical purposes. So, they're not buying or not taking any fur this trapping season, so the 2019-2020 trapping season. And I emailed Mr. Charlie Mashik about it, and he said, he was a NAFA receiving agent, so he received fur for that area, his area, and then which would handle getting it to the actual auction house. And he said they had a conference call, and he said it was a sad conference call. A company that has been around since 1670 is closing its doors. And that is, tragic to think, a company that's been around that long, whether you sell through NAFA or not, that's a major part of the fur industry, and just gone, shut, down with that amount of tradition. And or if I say tradition, I know a lot has changed, and nevertheless, it hurts, and it's going to hurt this coming season. So, this really couldn't have come at a worse time for trappers, because the season is here. People are already geared up trapping, and now they've got to figure out what to do with their fur. And now, there are other options. Probably the two biggest competitors, I would say, are Fur Harvesters Auction and Gronewald's Fur and Wool. And that's, I don't know how many millions of pieces of fur that NAFA received yearly or throughout a season, but that's a significant amount of infrastructure, that's got to be figured out, and logistics and all. It's not just like, either of those companies, or any company for that matter, could just flip the switch and, all of a sudden start buying, an extra 300,000 pieces of fur. I wouldn't think. I would say maybe Fur Harvesters Auction has the best opportunity, on a larger scale to absorb that, because I think they are affiliated with the Saga Furs, and they have one of their large sales is in Denmark, I'm pretty sure. But no doubt it's gonna throw a big wrench in the fur market this year, just from a marketing standpoint, and trying to figure out what trappers are going to do with their furs, and are these other places going to be able to handle the fur that is produced. The upside I see, I think it's not necessarily an upside, but the buyers are still out there. So it's not like NAFA was buying the fur themselves. They were just a broker for the fur, and so the buyers are still out there. The end users are still wanting the fur. So it's just a matter of the trapper getting the furs to the end user. So that's what I know basically. What I've heard and pieced together is and read directly from NAFA is, as it appears right now, North American Fur Auctions is no longer an option for selling fur, shipping fur. So if you were relying on that, you better be trying to figure out a backup plan. We've talked with John Zander of Zander Furs in the past, and he gave us a fur market report. I'm sure all of those, the fur buyers that are still around are going to gear up and try to do what they can. I had an interview with a guy, Grunewald, from Grunewald Fur and Wool, and that should air next week. And that was I kind of looked forward to that episode, and it just happened to work out. I'd already wanted to get him on the podcast anyway, just because they're a little bit different, and they've been doing routes through the South for several years now. But when I first started trapping, that wasn't an option. You see their name in the fur fishing game and the different trapping magazines, but they're kind of a Midwest company, and they didn't make routes through the South, so shipping your fur was about all there was. But they've started making routes through the South, and one of the big things that's a big plus in my opinion that I kind of come to find out about them is they have their own fleshing system, and particularly for beavers, that trappers can sell their beavers green, so just skinned and frozen, and they'll buy them. And that is and I believe otters they'll do like that as well. That's a huge plus for me, in my opinion, because beavers are one of the most time-intensive animals to handle the fur and all. So I think that was a really interesting podcast, and I think you'll enjoy that interview and that episode. But Guy specifically said that they're doing what they can to kind of figure out how to navigate this as well. Not only because it's a big opportunity, but because of what it means to trappers. Because for I hate to say a lot, because I really my perception, I guess you could say, is kind of skewed being a Southern trapper, and I don't think that us Southern trappers realize the impact and the amount of trappers there are in the Northeast and Midwest, and those areas that have a good fur quality. I think those areas are probably more heavily populated with trappers than a lot of us in the South realize. Y'all chime in and tell me if you think I'm wrong or right with that. But those are guys that are actually have the potential to make money versus a lot of us guys in the South, right? If people are making money in the South, a lot of times it's with live market coyotes and things like that, so the fur market's not really an impact anyway. But if there's not that ability to, at minimum, cover your expenses through selling your fur, maybe make a little extra cash, a little Christmas check or whatever, that's going to impact the number of people that are trapping. And the number of people that are trapping starts declining, and the backing for fighting the antis and all of the legislation that we've seen over this past year, really this 2019 year especially, all the anti-trapping and different legislation like that is just going to there's not going to be as many people and to fight it, and not going to be as many resources to fight it, and so very very realistically we could see trapping being lost in other areas. So that's a very important aspect as well of this whole thing is, and this year's probably going to be rough for selling fur. The last several years have been rough, right? So this is no real shock to anybody. It's not going to be a big shock to the system, but I would assume that a lot of this stuff is going to get worked out. Excuse me, especially over the next year, and we roll into the 2020-2021 season, and things should look totally different. So that's just kind of my 2 cents. Is one of the things that I did want to touch on and talk about, because I know that's been a kind of a hot button topic is what's going on with NAFA, and it's sad news, but time marches on, things change, and that's the only constant, right? That things change. So one other thing that kind of made me think with the kind of a concern for me with the announcement is, and I'm not super plugged into this, but through some of the, I followed NAFA on social media and get their email and the Wild Fur Shippers Council magazine and all that, but they did seem to do a lot of promotion of fur and using fur. They seem to do a lot of marketing, and I think that had to have some benefit. And so with them gone, that's definitely a not real sure of the right word that I'm trying to think of here, but I guess a watch out. So there are, I thought I'd rattle off here a few. There are a few other organizations that are pretty strong in promoting fur, promoting the use of fur, wild fur, and kind of trying to show the impact. Marketing is basically what they're doing, but really they're trying to, and I think this is something that trappers haven't capitalized on so far, but trying to kind of not take advantage in a negative way, but take advantage of the truth that fur is green, and there's so much emphasis and attention right now around plastics and water bottles and straws and all these kind of single-use plastic things that take hundreds of years presumably to biodegrade and decompose, and how those things affect the environment and ecosystems and all, and they use those in conjunction with fur being natural, being sustainably produced. Plastics come from fossil fuels versus fur comes from a sustainable resource, and fur is biodegradable. So for one, it's not it's I guess for the most part kind of a more expensive kind of luxury item. So it's not something that's as likely to be thrown away. So it's going to be more likely to be kind of passed down and handed down versus some plastic fake fur coat. And then also, if it is thrown away and goes into a landfill or whatever, it's going to break down and I guess biodegrade versus a fake fur plastic coat or something garment that is just going to be there for hundreds of years. So me and Guy Gronewald kind of touched on that too. And one of the things, not only do I think trappers really are capitalizing on that, but also the fact that I don't know how well this plays with the in I guess the United States, because there's relatively so little fur usage here. But one thing that I've thought about a lot is everybody wants a product to have a story, and fur absolutely has a story. From beavers that are damaging farm fields to coyotes that are killing fawns or cattle or Fluffy's dog in somebody's backyard. I mean, if there was some way that trappers could better capitalize on that in telling the story of why we do what we do, what we do, and then the impact that has, maybe that would help our case. I don't know. I'm always my mind's always turning and trying to think about things like that and how how we can try to not lose what we got, and with the society and the disconnect that folks have with nature and wild things. That's a constant concern, no doubt. But a couple of the organizations that I feel like do a pretty good job, and again, I don't know, it's kind of one of those things that once you get into your own little silo or your own little world, how much stuff outside of that do you really see? And I think this kind of stuff falls in, the same way. Just like as trappers, at this time of year we're looking at folks hunting pictures and trapping pictures and different things like that. But the International Fur Federation, and they're at We Are Fur on Instagram. They do in my opinion, they do a pretty good job of putting content out and trying to promote fur, and I guess the sustainability aspect and what we're doing and how it's being responsibly done. And then another one is the truth about fur. And that, I think the truth about fur, I was kind of looking to see, I think the truth about fur is kind of supported by several different organizations. So I don't have them pulled up here. But it's just truthaboutfur.com, and it talks about all the different aspects of fur, from trapping to the tanning process, garment making, and all that. But it's supported by the American Mink Council, Canada Mink Breeders, Fur Commission USA, some logo that's Canadian that I don't know what it is, Fur Harvesters Auction, the Fur Information Council of America, Fur Institute of Canada, Fur Wraps the Hill, which is the political action committee for Fur Information Council of America. Fur Information Council of America is fur.org. The International Fur Federation, which is the We Are Fur, and then was North American Fur Auctions, which we know they're no longer going to be supported there. But it's just an interesting. It's a good place to go and maybe direct people to learn a little bit more about the process and about what fur really is and what the production of fur really is, versus what a lot of people may think. One thing that I've thought about, and I was listening to Jeremiah Wood's Trapping Today podcast. As a side note, if you're listening to this right now and you've got just a second, I would really appreciate you going and leaving a 5-star review or leaving a rating or review in iTunes. I should have looked it up, but I think Jeremiah might be edging us out a little bit on the number of reviews we've got. And I'd really like to keep our number above his, all in good fun. I didn't realize we were in a competition until I was listening to one of his other episodes, and so now I'm firing back. So if you got a second, go and leave a rating and review for the Coyote Trapping School podcast in iTunes. I would greatly appreciate it. And I know Jeremiah's going to be watching, so let's keep those numbers up. But I was listening to his podcast episode with Stan Ray, and they were talking about the Yukon Men television series that aired, and the reception of that, and I thought back to and how positive that was. That was the first really mainstream production that was showed kind of an in-depth view of trapping and what that means, and I guess the positive feedback that they got. There wasn't a lot of backlash around that, and that's definitely a different story than us in the lower 48 that are we're not doing that for a living, so to speak, or we're doing it to maybe earn a little extra side money, or to control the predators on our hunting lease, or whatever. It's not a huge monetary factor in our lifestyle, but the one thing I think the takeaway from that, and John Zander mentioned it too when I interviewed him, is that people are genuinely interested. It's not very often, and I'm always hesitant when I bring up that I'm a trapper, or depending on what what company I'm around in, I guess you could say, something gets brought up, and a lot of times involuntarily somebody else will mention that I'm a trapper, and so then it kind of leads into a lot of discussion. But out of all that, I don't know that I can think of one negative experience I had where somebody was just bent out of shape, mad at me about what I did. Everybody is always very inquisitive and wants to know, and know how you do it, and man, that's something I've always thought about, or that's something my granddaddy used to do. Or there's the general public, I think, is a lot more interested and accepting of trapping, especially when it comes from not snaggletooth redneck from the backwoods, but folks that are you don't I guess folks that are not the stereotypical trapper by what a lot of people think of, which I think can only be depicted in a cartoon anyway. So I think just that kind of getting that out there more. When I think about since I've started trapping, and the people that I've met, and the places that I've been, and talking about that, really I only think there's one encounter, I guess, that really sticks out in my mind as being negative, and that was when I was in college, and I had an old film camera. So the digital cameras were out. I know they were, but I didn't have one. I had a film camera, and so I was trapping this really neat piece of property, and I was catching otters and coyotes. I caught one of the prettiest black coyotes that I ever caught on that piece of property, and it was a rainy. I had to check my traps early because it was a long ride, but it was rainy, and I got one catch picture, and then I had a couple pictures afterwards. Man, the absolute prettiest black coyote that I've ever seen, and caught red fox, skunk. I caught all. It was just an awesome piece of property, but I took my film to the Walmart in the town that I was going to school in, and I did a 1 hour pickup, and I came back and I asked the person at the counter to if I can pick up my pictures, and I said, yeah, just a minute, I need to call the manager. I said, well, that don't sound real good. So I was sitting there, and took a minute or two, and then I noticed a manager and a cop walking up. And I said, oh, you got to be kidding me. So they come walking up, and and turns out one of the I guess the photography technicians, or whoever develops your film, apparently they were also a animal control technician for the county there, the city there, and that they handed, that's what it was. They handed me back my negatives, and me being an idiot, I should have, I don't know if I should have done anything different, but I asked to see a manager because they just handed me back my negatives. I was like, I wanted my pictures, and that's what it was. So they had the cop there on standby, and I'm sure they were supposed to call a manager when I got there to begin with, but so they came back there, and so that particular photography person that was supposed to develop my pictures that didn't started carrying on about how I was trapping protected species and that was illegal, and I said I got a license. I said these are regulated species and there's a season for them. They're not protected. And the cop was super cool. He never said anything. He just kind of stood there. I guess they thought, I was probably going to pull out a gun and shoot everybody since, I was such a redneck hillbilly that was trapping things anyway. But anyway, long story short, I didn't get my picture developed. I didn't get arrested, so that's a positive. But I did. I went around and around with them several times. What are you going to do? I've got a license. It's in season. Let me go get a hunting regulations from the sporting goods section, and I'll show you where this is perfectly legal. And so anyway, that was about the most negative encounter I've had with people in my trapping experience. So otherwise, people tend to be very open and very interested. So I don't really know where I was going with that, other than I think, as trappers, if we can, talk a little bit more about what we do, I think there's a receptiveness to it as long as we are, careful about how we portray it and bring it to light and make sure that people understand that, we're not out willy-nilly shooting and killing and raping and pillaging, that, there's a season, and there's guidelines, and there's licenses, and, that we're abiding by all these things. There's biologists that are checking to make sure that there's no overharvest and that populations are stable and sustainable. So the takeaway, that will be the takeaway. As far as what to do with your fur, I don't have a clue. Call John Zander. Call the G&W Fur and Wool. Maybe send it to fur harvesters. I tell you, one of the biggest things, and I think it'll be a big factor for guys in the South. Actually, let me look it up right quick. Because one of the, in the last few years, here we go. The one thing I'm wondering about is pickup schedules. Because that was one thing the North American Fur Auctions provided. They got to where they had agents in most states, even in the South, and so there were routes throughout the South where there was only one pickup in Georgia, but there was one in South Carolina, one in Tennessee, one in Alabama, and so if you didn't, I could drive 2 to 3 hours and take all my fur, versus having to try to box it up and ship it, which is going to cost an arm and a leg, way more than a tank of gas. So looking at Fur Harvesters Auction, they have an agent in Arkansas, and that looks like about the southernmost state, versus, like I was talking before, Grunwald has started running routes through the South, and I think their routes actually published on November 1st. Let's check it out and see. It's gfwco.com. So let's go to the east and click on Georgia and see what it says. The east includes Georgia, Maryland, New York, North Carolina, and South Carolina. That's a pretty good mix, isn't it? And then the south is Arkansas, Alabama. And I don't have They haven't got the roots finalized yet. But anyway, that's going to be a huge dictator for me. Is I'm not shipping my fur. If I can get it to a pickup point, and the one good thing about like Grunewald is they're going to cut you a check right there. I'm sure that's going to be a huge selling point, especially for a lot of people that had or have fur at NAFA, and are concerned about selling to another or shipping to another auction house. So that would be what I would. I would kind of speculate right now, especially across the South. Any of the folks that were shipping to NAFA are probably going to be trying to hit that Grunewald route when they come through. So, and myself included, probably, especially since I don't have to flesh and stretch beavers. But anyhow, I think that's enough rambling for this evening. But I appreciate y'all listening. Let me know if you've got other thoughts or other options or other opportunities, because I think trappers as a whole are going to need to know. Want to know what their options are with their fur, and this is going to throw a big monkey wrench in things, but it'll get worked out. Just take time. So with that, I'll wrap it up. Be sure to go and leave a rating and review in it's not iTunes anymore, it's Apple Podcasts, but I would greatly appreciate it, and we'll catch y'all later. And as a side note, I believe I have an interview with Jeremiah Wood of Trapping Today published this week as well, so go, and Jeremiah's a pretty good guy, even though we want to beat him. He's got a good podcast and covers a lot of good topics too. He's got a great guest as I'm on there this week, so go and listen in and see what you think, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for listening.